No
Record.
relation.
Hi there. I'm here today with Ruth Maher, who is a PT by training and also the co-inventor of the Innovo, which is a product to help stress urinary incontinence, or urinary incontinence, I guess I should say. Um, and I am always impressed when women see a need and then they do something about it, right? I mean, you brought this product kind of out of the clinic where you were using kind of a version of it. And, that takes an amazing amount of time, dedication, and figuring out new skills. And, I think that's amazing. So can you tell us a little bit about Innovo and what that is?
Sure, it's a neuromuscular electrical stimulation device, but it's different than the conventional ones that women were typically using like anal or vaginal probes or even surface electrodes. And this has 8 embedded electrodes, and the stimulating surface area is 1,200 centimeters square, which is a lot more than you can put on a vaginal probe because the space that the probe occupies is quite small. And there's also smart algorithm programming into it using multiple paths. And what that means is that you reduce the fatigability associated with single fixed pathways, say a TENS machine using just 2 electrodes where the current flows from just one electrode to the other, and it depolarizes the same nerves all the time. Well, um, the nerves get tired and the muscle isn't recruited as well in that type of setup. So here I have a thing called multipath stim, which has some programming, and the stimulus or the current is bounced off the 8 electrodes in a variety of patterns, multipath, to maximize the contraction and also reduce the fatigability associated with regular NMES or neuromuscular electrical stimulation. The other thing is the size of the stimulating surface area, 1,200 centimeters squared, means you can put a lot more current in because those pelvic floor muscles are quite deep in the pelvis. And because I'm going through the glutes and the outer hips, the current has to go through a lot of tissues, and current doesn't flow in a straight line. It'll go take the path of least resistance. And there's a lot of adipose around that area. So you have to put in a lot of current. And because the surface is so large with the electrodes, it reduces the current density. So you can put a lot more current in to target the pelvic floor muscles.
Um, so there are shorts that you put on, and then that short has a current in it, and the current stimulates the muscles. I don't think a lot of people realize that that's how muscles work, right? That there's actual and electrical stimulus. Um, and then when you put on the shorts, how long do you have to wear them?
We advertised 30 minutes, but in my early studies, 20 minutes seemed sufficient. But that was with a small sample size and with quite lean individuals. And we all know that a high BMI is also associated with stress and incontinence, because if you have a lot of adipose around your tummy when you're coughing and sneezing, that weight pushes on the bladder, which then pushes on the incompetent pelvic floor muscles. So we extended that to 30 minutes based on a study that was done in Germany a couple of years ago. So 30 minutes, 5 days a week. It doesn't have to be consecutive days.
Okay. And then for how many weeks?
12 weeks.
And when do you normally see women experiencing an improvement?
Well, the average is within 4 weeks, but I've seen within 2 weeks. And I postulate or theorize as to why that's happening. Because we all learned, well, I learned PT school that many years ago that
Oh, you froze.
I'm still here.
Okay.
Can- Yeah, you
So
were still live. Sorry about that.
no, that's okay. I don't know what happened. That's the first time that's happened, but such is life.
Such is
Okay,
life.
so you were saying you've noticed an improvement at 2 weeks.
2 to 4 weeks, yeah. And the reason is because we all think it's just strength, but it's not really. It's timing of the contraction is imperative. because the superficial pelvic floor, the issue cavernosum and bulbous casenosum well muscles are very important. It's not just the levator ani, and they've been shown to have a lot of fast twitch fibers, like the sprinter fibers, and they have to close under times when you cough or sneeze or exercise because that increases your intra-abdominal pressure. So they have to come on really quickly to close the holes to stop you leaking. So I designed Innovo to replicate that in that fast sort of reflex twitch. So it's only on for about 5 seconds, 4.5 to 5 seconds, to train the neurological system to come on. And if you know anything about training muscles, you can see strength increases very early on. And it's not because the muscle has hypertrophied, it's because you've upregulated the nervous system. And I'm just about in when is it, September, I'm going to present a paper at the International Continence Society showing that 5 minutes of Innovo uh, significantly improved women's ability to contract the pelvic floor. And it was done in all women that couldn't contract. It was just a small sample size, but my effect size was very large. So just after 5 minutes, which is 30 contractions with adequate rest between each one, they were all able to do a pelvic floor contraction. So it looks like it enhances your kinesthetic awareness or proprioception as well, which is fantastic because it teaches you how to do the contraction.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions is do you have to know how to do a contraction to use a Novo? But you're saying no, and it actually improves your ability to contract your pelvic floor and increases that
Correct.
awareness.
Yes, it does. Because it's a very odd contraction. You know, the muscles in there don't move a joint. Like if you're teaching a bicep curl, most people are looking at what I'm doing and not listening to what I'm saying. And those muscles don't contract a joint. So it's very difficult to explain how to recruit them. You know, we use cues like imagine you're cutting off the flow of urine or you're trying to stop gas passing. Um, but invariably people will use other muscles or they
Yeah.
just can't get it, or they'll do a bearing down maneuver, which is something you don't want them to do.
Right. It feels much more abstract, right? Because I mean, it's just it's hard to see and feel that muscle move.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so then, you do your 12 weeks, and what about maintenance? I mean, if you're learning to use your pelvic floor and you're realizing how to do those contractions, do you need to continue to use it in a maintenance way or do you kind of figure that out on your own and don't need
I,
it anymore?
I recommend once a week. I always recommend that when women learn how to do the contraction, they do the contraction while the device is on, because it sort of reinforces that good motor behavior. So they should continue doing the Kegels themselves or the pelvic floor exercises themselves. I don't like to see anybody dependent on anything like you would a drug.
Yeah.
But once a week um, helps because you're recruiting a lot more motor units with NMES than you would volitionally. And that's sort of a protective thing. You're not supposed to recruit all motor units because they fatigue quickly. Um, so it's sort of like a booster. It re-enhances their ability to know how to do the contraction.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so that's what I recommend anyway.
So, based on what you said, does this work less well for women who are heavier or maybe carry more weight in their hips?
I would have to say not for heavy around the hips, but around the tummy, definitely. Um, Probably those with a BMI of close to 40.
Okay.
Um, the issue with research is you always look for homogeneous groups. And the research that was done for the FDA clearance was, I think, 35 was the cutoff, 35 or less for BMI. Um, but women heavier than that have been using and getting results, but they're not as good as the lighter women or the leaner women.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Um, and
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 weight loss does help. I mean,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
you can always
And
work on that as well.
the other thing I'd say is they probably don't get to the threshold to get a contraction. Um, a lot of people will think the glute contraction or the buttock contraction is the pelvic floor contraction, but it's not. That's the initial contraction because we have to go through the glutes to get to the pelvic floor. And the glutes are part of a synergy. There's two synergies for contracting the pelvic floor, or there's an isolated contraction or synergy with other muscles, according to where the muscles are on the homunculus. Um, so a lot of people initially don't get to that threshold. And this is how I describe, they should feel the symmetrical butt contraction. And then as they turn the intensity up and get used to it, They'll feel it in their anal or rectal area. Then they turn it up a little bit more and they'll feel it along the perineal area or high up between your legs. And you feel tapping first, but that's not a tetanic contraction, as we call it, or full contraction. It's just like little twitches. Then you have to turn it up a little bit higher. And it's usually between 55 and 65 for most women before they get lift off. And I wish I'd had a photograph of their faces when they get lift off because they're like, that's an odd sensation. Um, because it's a huge contraction. It feels like somebody's just pulling everything up inside you.
Well, and it's unlike anything you've ever felt before, right? I mean, those muscles
Yeah.
don't usually contract that strongly.
No.
So you were so kind and you sent me a sample and I tried it and I, definitely felt it in my butt. I mean, I felt the tingling and then I felt it in my butt. I felt my butt contract, but I never felt it move past a butt contraction. So what did I do wrong?
So I'd ask you what intensity you were at. So that's the number on the little handheld unit.
I turned it up pretty high. I mean, I went up to about 60, 62.
Okay. So the other thing I'd recommend is there's little dots on the back of the shorts, the
Mm-hmm.
gluteal fold. They should be at in the fold because the two electrodes on the buttocks are like the hallmark electrodes. They have to be placed a certain way for that current path to go appropriately to recruit the pelvic floor. Um, so did you put your hand back basically when the shorts are on and palpate along there for those little knobbly things?
I never found the dots on my shorts. So I was looking for them and I never found them. But you don't see them, you actually palpate them?
Yeah, well, maybe they've taken them off because I mean, I don't work for Atlantic Therapeutics. I'm a professor in a PT program.
Yeah.
I just consult with them, but they were on the last ones I saw, unless they've taken them off. But um,
That was on the instructions, right? To make sure that they were underneath, kind
yeah,
of at that right spot. But I
yeah,
didn't actually see them. And so that's what I was wondering is if I just didn't have them on quite correctly.
yeah. What I do is if you have the shorts, put them down flat with the buttock electrodes facing you, and they're tiny little dots that
Okay.
are sort of screen printed on, and you can palpate them yourself when they're on.
Okay.
And if they're not, let me know because I'll have to tell the company that
That they're
maybe
not
I don't
there.
know.
Yeah. How do you size them? I mean, is that a common thing that you hear that, you don't feel the pelvic floor contraction or was it just me?
No, it's not just you. There has been a few. Now I don't hear all the
Yeah,
feedback
the ins and
because
out.
I'm not in the company, but um, most of the time it would be because the intensity isn't high enough or the butt electrodes are too high.
Okay.
Right? They're not just above the gluteal fold.
Okay.
The other reason would be if there was a paravaginal defect and if it had impacted the nerve, or sorry, the nerves that go to the pelvic floor, because there's so much variability, it's not just the pudendal nerve. That would be one other thing. But I haven't heard of many that couldn't get a contraction. Um, the other thing would be if the electrodes weren't all on your skin, although there's a safety thing built in that if the current touches clothing, it'll turn the machine off because that will increase the current density.
Okay.
Um, Lotion could be another barrier if you had lotion on your skin.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I read everything and I didn't have lotion on. I kind of checked all of those things, but I'll try again because I could definitely feel it in my butt, but it never went, kind of more perineal.
The other thing you can do is you can palpate your coccyx um,
Yeah.
over the shorts, and it should move away from your finger, so sort of anterior
Okay.
cranially, because those muscles are attached to the coccyx. So I sometimes tell women to do that.
Okay.
Palpate the coccyx, and some women will say, "I feel my tailbone moving." So that's a sign that you're getting a contraction, but not everybody says that.
Okay.
The other thing is if you have access to an ultrasound imaging device,
Mm-hmm.
um, you can put it down the front of the shorts and aim at S2 towards your bladder.
Yeah.
Um, but you'd have to have something in your bladder. Usually say don't empty your bladder before you use it. But test it with women with urine in the bladder so I can see the bladder base or bladder neck
Yeah. See it
moving.
move.
Yeah. So that's another thing
I
you
could
can
always do
try.
that. I
Yeah.
don't have one at home, but I do have access to one.
Okay.
Um, so who did you design Innovo for? Who's like the dream woman out there?
It was initially for women who couldn't do pelvic floor contractions because I had a private practice and I was using ultrasound imaging like way back in 2005. It wasn't popular in PT practice, because we couldn't bill for it, but I thought it was a valuable tool to have for me as a clinician and also for patients to show them what was or wasn't happening inside. Because there's only so much you can palpate with your finger. And even doing digital exams to check the strength or the movement, some women just couldn't connect with the pelvic floor. And even with the vaginal probes, they didn't like them or they couldn't, the current density was too high. I couldn't get it up high enough. Um, and I always believed in specificity of training principles because of my background in exercise science. And why were we teaching women how to do Kegels lying down all the time and using stim lying down all the time? Because the leaking happens when you're standing up, when the muscles are so vulnerable against gravity. Um, so I really made it to teach women how to do the contraction. That was my motivating factor. And I've sort of bastardized two Intellect XL NMAS machines and had lots of electrodes on and tried different conformations and tried it on friends with I had a little portable Sonosite 180 that I used with a overhead projector so I could bring that with me everywhere before we had these little portable ultrasounds. Um, and just trial and error, I figured out the topography of where to put the electrodes because I'd always learned, oh, you shouldn't stimulate the buttock muscles to get to the pelvic floor. But now there's research out to say they're part of the synergy. So, um, but then I did a pilot study at University College Dublin because they have a good history of designing different stimulators with this multipath stimulating platform. Um, and I had a huge, I hate to say cure rate, but that's what it was. I had women that were mild to moderately incontinent based on the International Continence Guidelines of how much they leaked on the pads, or weighed the
Yeah,
pads pre and post. And I had like a 86% cure rate in 4 weeks. So I knew it wasn't just strength. Um, and then at 8 weeks was when my cutoff was, it was 90 odd percent. And I had women saying, I feel like I've won the lottery. I've gone out and bought my first pair of white jeans in 12 years.
yeah,
Um, I had a woman from New York who was 75. She saw something I did on The View and emailed me during COVID. And um, Atlantic Therapeutics were kind enough to give her a device. And I sort of coached her over the internet and how to use it because it was it's OTC. And she had fecal incontinence, stress incontinence, and tricompartmental prolapses. And she used the device and she emailed me back. She was in tears and she said that her stress incontinence had resolved, her fecal incontinence was almost resolved, and her cystocele had resolved. And I said, how do you know? She said, I went back to my physician at NYU and they did a defacogram and some other imaging, and they were shocked. So that's one terrific story
yeah,
from a woman that had had a terrible quality of life because this and other pelvic floor dysfunctions, they really are quality of life. People don't realize how small women's lives get. Well, you probably realize because you see it
yeah,
day out today. But they really, it's not the cost of the pads, it's the cost of the quality of life. Stop
yeah.
exercising. They end up with all sorts of comorbidities because they don't exercise. Ruins their intimacy with their partners because 60 odd percent that have SUI or stress incontinence will leak during sex. So who would want to have sex if they're leaking urine?
Yeah.
Um, and I don't believe we're doing enough. Um, like in the UK, they're going into high schools or secondary schools now, the young girls, 13, 14, and they're teaching them all about the pelvic floor
I know.
and how
I,
to
I read
prevent.
that recently that that was part of their, kind of sex education curriculum,
Yeah,
right? To teach
yeah,
women about their own bodies, which is so amazing on one hand, and then on the other hand, I just don't even understand why we're not all doing it, right? I mean, we're still kind of embarrassed about the female pelvis and don't want to talk about it, and it is to the detriment of so many women out there.
it
And
is.
I agree with you. I mean, it's hard to age gracefully when you're dealing with these issues, right? And it's always so rewarding when you get those stories and you have been able to help someone kind of push through and live a little bit more normally,
Yeah,
right?
and the thing is, it's not an old lady's issue.
No.
There's teenagers that have it, especially if they're involved in high impact sports like volleyball, basketball, track and
Hmm.
field. And I've spoken to some of these young girls and women. They won't tell their coaches because they said their coaches are all male and they're embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I just
Well,
think
and
it's leaking.
One of the things that always occurs to me is it feels like the smaller the uniform and the smaller the short, the higher impact it is, right? And the more likely you are to leak. So everything about that is horrible for young girls, right? Who are don't want to talk about leaking. So, I mean, that's actually a great point. Have you used this on, young athletes and had improvement?
I haven't used it on young athletes. That's a plan. Well, the plan is to go into the high schools and educate. I did something during COVID on Zoom, and it was a mixed gender presentation on stress incontinence. And I had tons of emails later on from the young women. They didn't want to say anything online in front of the guys, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, but there was quite a few of them. So, uh, I have to get parents' permission because they all have sex ed, but that's not the same.
No.
We need to be talking about health of the pelvic floor, and do something about prevention. We're a bit too reactionary in America compared to other countries. I'm from Ireland. Um, but there isn't a lot of prevention for women for these conditions. Even as a PT, I get them after the fact.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
not paid for prevention.
Right. It's so interesting that you say that because I was talking to some of our local PTs and, talking about creating an exercise program for pregnant women as prevention, right? Before they have any issues. And there's a lot of data to support that, right? And that it'll minimize the chance of incontinence and prolapse afterwards. But it has to be they have to pay for it, right? Insurance won't cover it. And so it becomes very difficult to design these programs. But at the same time, I think that's what so many women want, right? And yeah, I mean, there's just such a huge need there, and we're doing women a huge disservice, right?
Yeah,
Especially expecting them to come in after they deliver when life has become crazy, right? I mean, if you're at least introduced to these concepts, you know how your muscles work, it's much easier to then start a program or continue a program, right? Rather than starting from scratch. So I agree with everything you say, and I applaud you for doing so much and getting the word out there, right? And normalizing it. I think it's so important for, the 10% of young girls who leak with high impact to know that, this is a pretty common issue and there are things that you can do. So, and this is just such a lovely way to treat things. I mean, I'm a surgeon, I do a lot of surgery. I would be very happy to put myself out of business, right? I mean, I think prevention would just be so lovely.
unique to
Do,
hear.
yeah. Do you get
Uh,
any negative feedback about the device? Have you heard
uh,
any complaints?
yeah, some people don't like electrical stim, right? They don't like tens machines, which is a lower current. They just don't like the sensation. But I can tell you, the company will give them their money back.
Okay.
And even with the sizing, um, we've used anthropometric data from the garment industry. How they size clothes and all that sort of stuff. So we came up with a measurement around the trochanters, basically around the largest area around the hips and the buttock, as a way of sizing. The one thing I can tell you that happens if people have a lot of adipose around their abdominal region, or they have uniquely thin legs,
Hmm.
right? The electrodes won't maintain contact, but there's a small amount of people are like that. And again, if the size is off, I think they've 90 days that they can return it and get one that's properly sized, or they can get their money back. So the company are very good like that. Um, that's the one thing with any type of clothing. You're using these standardized measures, but we're
Yeah.
not all standard sizes.
Oh, mm-mm.
So
Definitely not. Do you have different sizes in other countries?
no, they're all the same. They're just in centimeters in Europe and inches over here. But the
Yeah,
measurement, the way you measure, is exactly the same.
it's the same.
Um, but obviously there's a max size. So I'd say if your BMI is 40 plus, you're probably going to find it hard to get a pair to fit you. That said, the first iteration of the device was a wrap like chaps
Hmm.
that you wrapped around the buttocks and the leg on each side, and they are still available. I don't think that Atlantic Therapeutics advertise them because they're a little bit cumbersome to put on. Like everybody can put on pants, but the chaps, the chaps they are a little bit cumbersome to put on, but they are still available.
Okay, that's good to know. And how much is the device?
Ooh, you know what? I can't tell you. Isn't it terrible? Um, I think it's about 400 and something dollars. I mean,
Yeah.
as I said, I don't work for them. I do interviews like this about the technology.
Yeah.
But I know they give lots of discounts. I think I
Yeah.
saw one over, especially over the holidays, they give $100 or $150 off.
Yeah, I
Um,
was looking on the website this morning, and right now they have one for 150 off, which is, I mean, that's great. I mean, that's amazing.
yeah,
So yeah,
I have seen posts on Facebook where people say you've got to be kidding me, it's a bit expensive, but it's cheaper than buying pads, I think, for a year.
it all depends on how you think about it, right?
Yeah,
And it is a lot of money out of pocket, but over time, you're right. I mean, especially if it decreases pad costs, it's definitely cheaper than a surgery is, and your copay for most surgeries. So yeah, I mean, I think in the long run, it does make sense. Um, but
I have a
I think the way our healthcare system is set up, and everybody wants these things to be covered by insurance, and they're often not. Um, and
yeah.
that's just unfortunately the way we're set up these days. So what are you going to do next? What are your next steps?
Um, well, I have that paper I'm going to, or the abstract I'm going to present at an International Continence Society, showing how just 5 minutes teaches you how to do a Kegel, which is terrific. The next thing I want to do is I have a new ultrasound machine that has elastography on it, so it measures the stiffness of tissues. So I want to see what impact the what shorts have on the levator ani and even the superficial muscles does. Ischial cavernosus and bulbospongiosus muscles are so important. Um, to see if it changes like the morphology or the characteristics of the muscle. So this device is fantastic. It was developed in France and it was used to discriminate benign from metastatic breast tumors based on how stiff they were. Um, so I'm going to try and use that device after a couple of weeks use of the device in probably some healthy women first to see the impact it has on the healthy clients. Then individuals, I shouldn't say unhealthy, those without SUI, because
Yeah,
women
yeah,
with
yeah.
SUI can be healthy. And I'll check it on those. But at the moment, I'm actually working with an ultrasound company from Canada that sells these tiny little portable machines they're smaller than a pint of Guinness. That's how I show how small they are. Um, and I'm working with machine learning and AI individuals to come up with a quick way of measuring bladder volume because that's so important in hospitals for discharge and discharging people off indwelling catheters that can cause all sorts of infections.
Yeah.
So there's a team of us in my college here. I work in Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine in Georgia, in the PT program, and we're looking at um, basically comparing it against what we call the prolate ellipsoid method, which is quite cumbersome. You have to take a couple of images and measure the depth and height, the volume, and all this. Um, so this you just point and the machine learns by the shape of the bladder what the volume is. So I'm so excited about that. And the data will be used for the company to get FDA approval for the program that goes on the ultrasounds. So I'm into the bladder and the pelvic floor in a big way these days. And then I'm teaching obviously as well.
That'll be great. I mean, we have an ultrasound machine that we use in the office all the time, but it's not overly accurate, right? I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
it works really well, but other times it does not. And if you are a little bit bigger, it doesn't work as well. So
yeah,
and it's just not as precise as you would like. So
yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, I love this little tool we use in school. It's fantastic. The resolution is second to none. It's actually better than the larger ultrasound, like a computer,
yeah.
measures the stiffness. It's incredible what they can put on these little devices now.
It is pretty amazing, right? It'll all be on our phones one of these days. Um,
Yeah,
well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything you do and your education, and I think that this is a great device and definitely helps a lot of women. So thank you so much for your time.
thank you very much.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks a lot. Great talking to you.
Yeah.